Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about this lovely book called Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It is a harrowing book, I'd say. It's one that I read a couple months ago, so it's not fresh in memory, but it had enough of an impact on me that I remember the main plot elements, the main themes, and some of the more shocking things that I could resonate with, especially at the time. A couple months ago I was unemployed. I was struggling with substance use problems, just urges in general to escape. Um, Increasing cynicism in my life, which is a big part of what we have with the Underground Man, and kind of just constantly being stuck in my own head, in my own thoughts, in my own experience, in my own distorted experience of life, and not being able to get out of that, right? And I remember reading Notes from the Underground and just seeing so much of that, not to the same degree, thankfully. I think the Underground Man's cynicism and distrust and views are so rigid and so noxious that they really do control his entire existence, and make him do terrible things, make him act terribly, think in distorted ways. He's a man who feels both incredibly prideful of his intelligence, of his ability to reflect and understand, right? He's kind of like, he's just like, I know, but I know so well, I know so much, I have this insight that others just don't have, but still he's so intensely, acutely aware of how in the outside world to anybody looking at him from the outside, he's just kind of a social failure, right? And just somebody who really is just kind of outcasted, isolated, and who just constantly replays moments from his past life, and scrutinizes them intensely, and has formed this idea. Like, there's two parts to the book. There's the first part that criticizes, I think it was like utopianism, and talk about like the Crystal Palace, this land of no possible wrong, of something about human nature being good, and science leading the way forward. At the time that the book was written, there was a lot of hope that science would, revolutionize and fix everything. Everything would be known, and that social harmony would be inevitable. And I guess the Underground Man kind of dismantled that in his own view. He gave his own philosophical take on that, on human nature, and it wasn't. He doesn't believe in the good of humanity in the same way that some of the more utopian, optimism-driven people have, right? Because we all have our ideas of human nature, and they're shaped by our experience, by our environment, all of that, even genetics. For me, for most of my life, I haven't been very utopian, optimistic. I've been more of a cynical, pessimistic kind of skeptic, very, very skeptic, and often beneath that skepticism there is a genuine cynicism that exists. So I cited and understood a lot of what the Underground Man said, but I think he's just brought it so much. It's a really an extreme kind of person. I don't like his actions are vile. His actions are vile. I think her name's Eliza. I might have to check that back, but yeah, Liza. She's a young woman on the road to prostitution. I think she is a prostitute, and he tells her kind of her fate if she continues. She has her own hopes, and he takes a little imaginary flower of those hopes, projects his own view of, his own rational view of what's going to happen, and breaks that bubble she lives in of all those hopes and dreams, gives her reality. She finally hears something that she thinks is real, and then he, for the first time, sees himself in action, right? Actually being able to communicate a real part of himself and potentially have a positive impact. Liza is kind of enchanted by this man. She's never heard anything like it, and she sees some kind of way out or just something real there. And immediately after that happens, he's thrown into a frenzy, a mental frenzy. Just, not believing how that could have happened, and, being so stuck in his own neuroticism. It just ends up spiraling mentally, becomes an anxious, massive wreck, and by the time she shows up, he's goes from like this intense anxiety to anger towards her, spite. How could you have done this to me? How could you have been so stupid to believe, believe those lies I was telling you? What was the line? I turned you soft as butter, and now, something. Right? He really just destroys somebody. And before that, there's another scene of massive humiliation for him. This kind of opposing forces within him of ridiculing institutions and ridiculing these hierarchies and, power, status, all these things. He just, in his mind, he doesn't really see it as, an important thing, or just like, why should we care about that, but then he also deeply cares about it at the same time. Like in his intellectual mind, he has things set out in a way that makes sense and can be rational to some degree, again based off a very cynical point of view, but they do make sense. But then when it comes to that action, he contradicts himself a lot. He does crave that power. He wants to prove himself to others. He does care about status. Very anxious. Just a lot of things like that. He gets himself drunk and just makes a fool of himself. And I think one of the biggest things in this book is that he never really tested his belief. He's so convinced of himself, right? That's one of the biggest things with the Underground Man that I can say I don't really share, is that I don't believe everything everything I think. A lot. I try and test my beliefs. I try and reason from different point of views, but he's very fixed in his beliefs. Because of his massive ego, really. If we're looking at it straight up, like, he's just so sure of himself. He views his intelligence as kind of greater than everyone else's in this world. It's just one, really up there, like, I should be on top, but then he views himself as an insect, a rodent, a vermin. This really conflicting internal experience, and it really torments him, and it torments the people around him too. He torments them, and I think it's implied at the end that he just kind of lives in this cave and is isolated from the world, and now just thinks, and when you're thinking like a person like that, it's not pretty, man. I can't imagine how distorted your view would be from isolation, right? Not getting like his experience, and I can see why he would isolate, because he caused great torment, and I think he's very aware of that. He's hyper aware of the pain he's causing, hyper conscious of it, and his rational mind tries to tell him that it doesn't matter, that it shouldn't matter. Of course it doesn't matter, but then there's the emotional reality. and it's that disconnect between his emotional experience and his emotional desires and his rational intellectual mind, just constantly at odds with each other. And it really torments them, you know? Really, really torments them. A very spiteful person. I mean, the first line of the book, it really does start off strong, you know? I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. However, I know nothing at all about my disease and do not know for certain what ails me. I don't consult a doctor for it and never have, though I have respect for medicine and doctors. Besides, I am extremely superstitious, sufficiently so to respect medicine. Anyway, I am well educated enough not to be superstitious, but I am superstitious. I mean, those lines right there give you such a great introduction to this character. You know, very aware of his circumstances, very aware of, you know, his superstitions, of the fact that he believes a lot of things just because, you know, on this kind of visceral, emotional plane, but there's that conflict. And that conflict plagues him throughout the whole book. It shapes his view of the world. And I'm probably going to reread this because it's such a, I mean, it's been months since I've read it, but I still remember the emotional impact it had on me. And just, I think it helped me try and change my course of action to really not fall more into the depths of cynicism, of trying to overcome the isolation I was experiencing, because I realized just how dark it can get. Right? This is this character is a warning to me. It was a warning, at least. It's a caricature of what I was becoming, and yeah, it's important to realize that, and to not allow yourself to slip into that state where that becomes who you are, or even just, you know, even just half of that, of the underground man, and you're already going to be tormenting yourself and others. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Great book. Dostoevsky is really an amazing author. I mean, I'm reading Crime and Punishment. I have the book on me right here, but great book. Raskolnikov. See parallels between characters, and yeah, just good to read. Anyways, okay, I'll stop rambling here. Thank you for listening.